Founding Translation lecture series. This is the second lecture of this spring 2012, and it is my pleasure to introduce the speaker, Professor Sohn. It's the first time I'm pronouncing her last name. I don't do it very well, but it's okay, I guess. Professor Sohn is a freelance conference interpreter and translator. She received her BA in Sociology from Ewha Women's University in Seoul, Korea, and a master's in conference interpreting from the Graduate School of Interpretation and Translation of Hanguk, University of Foreign Studies, as well in Seoul, Korea. And right now she's a PhD candidate at the University of Rovira y Virgili in Barcelona, Spain. And she's working on assessment for translation and interpreting studies. She has worked in international conferences on politics, finance, computer science, and telecommunications. And her translation work includes several types of documents released by the Korean government agencies and multinational businesses. And right now she's a professor here at the Monterey Institute. She's the language coordinator of the Korean program. Today she will be presenting a talk on aptitude tests, and she'll be, in particular, the title of this presentation here, Predicting Students' Success Through Aptitude Tests. She'll be speaking for 45 minutes or less, after which we'll have 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes for questions. So it's my welcome Professor Sohn.
Well, thank you, Miryoung, for that kind introduction. I especially like to thank her for giving me this push to work on this research. And again, I've started this PhD course since 2005, but haven't been able to produce the final thesis to get my final PhD degree. For some reason, I wasn't able to concentrate on this research for a very long time, but with this push from Maria Sierra, I was able to revisit the research I have done previously, and I was able to make a little bit of progress to be able to present something today. As Maria Sierra has mentioned, that my research is basically on the aptitude test. The entrance exam plays an important role in selecting a competent pool of students. An ideal set of tests for any training institution would be designed in a way to ensure validity and reliability. The predictive validity of the entrance exam, that is EDT, ODT, at the GS file of MIIS has been of great concern for faculty members in screening candidates for the program. And as a Korean faculty member, I have seen some inconsistencies in terms of the predictive value of the current entrance exam. And against this backdrop, two-phased study was conducted. First phase of the study is to review existing TNI entrance exam in light of the correlations with students' performance in school using three data sets: EDT, ODT, students' GPAs, and students' professional exam scores. And the second phase of the study is to design and administer a new set of alternative test sets to EDT, ODT. And this is also compared with GPAs and professional exam scores of students. Before elaborating on the two-phase research that I have conducted, I'd like to share my personal observations, which were the major motivation for me to conduct the research in this topic. I've been teaching at the Institute for more than 10 years, and during those years, I've seen students excelling from the beginning to the end. And also I've seen students struggling to get it through the end. So you two contrasting examples of students we had in the Korea program in my earlier days at the institute. One student whom I would refer to as student A seemed to be a perfect bilingual Korean English, and she graduated from a very prestigious college in Korea, and her EDT was impeccable, so we admitted her with such a great enthusiasm. And the other student whom I would refer to as student B, on the other hand, had a very weak B language, which was English. But she was also a graduate from a very prestigious college in Korea. And her EDT was not that impressive either. And in the beginning of the course, both students suffered greatly. And in the case of student B, it was expected because her EDT was not that great. But I was wondering, why would student A, who has perfect bilingual skills and who is capable of expressing her ideas in both A and B languages, suffer in our program? And to make the long story short, at the end of the first year, student B passed all the required courses, but student A, who had perfect A and B skills, failed all the required courses. And at the end of the 2-year course, student B graduated on top of her class, and student A couldn't graduate. So that's when I started wondering about the validity and reliability of our EDT, and started thinking there must be something wrong with the EDT. And because I almost failed student B in the EDT, but I was feeling extra generous on the day. I just admit it. But had I decided not to admit her to the program, we would have missed the very best students who would become a very good translator and interpreter in the market. So that's the beginning of my quest for this research topic. And the other observation I'd like to share with you is we give out same EDTs every year to different group of students. And we evaluate the EDT based on the same criteria or standard. And then why is that one year we have a very strong group of students and another year we have very weak group of students? So if a candidate is deemed to be eligible to be admitted to our program, shouldn't he or she possess similar level of competence? So those are the two observations I wanted to share with you, which have been the basis of my research. So moving on to the conceptual framework of my research, the first one is the validity. An ill-constructed test would result in wasted time and effort of mistakenly accepted students and undermine the success of overall curriculum, as we have seen in the case of student A. And there are many specific considerations to take into account in evaluating a test design and procedure. Validity and reliability are the underlying concepts of my research on the construction of the EDT and ODT. Validity is a concept discussed by many different scholars in different terms, and according to Cronbach, Thorndike, and Hagen, validity refers to the extent to which a test measures what is designed to measure. And Clifford says a valid test should have good evidence that high scores on the test are associated with high levels of ability needed to perform. In a TNI training institution, where a certain form of entrance exam is administered, the validity of a test is the extent to which the performance of the test actually corresponds to the quality of performance in a TNI training course. That is, those who did well in the EDT-ODT are expected to be successful throughout their 2-year course in the GS style. And there are three types of validities stated by Messick and Sawyer: content-related, criterion-related, and construct-related. Content-related validity is a degree to which test content represents the domain. And criterion-related validity is a relationship between test scores and external criterion being measured. And construct-related validity is an attribute or characteristic of individual reflected in test performance. Of these three types, I think the most relevant to this study would be the criterion-related validity, as it also denotes the predictive value of a test. A criterion measure for the entrance exam would be whether those who scored high in the EDT/ODT would continue to perform well throughout their study in the 2-year course and be awarded a degree and a certificate in their degree track. While validity is related to what it measures, as Thorndike and Hagen puts it, reliability is related to how accurately it measures what it does measure. Reliability has to do with the consistency and precision of a measurement procedure. It is commonly defined as an estimate of the degree of consistency, of constancy among repeated measurements of individuals with the same instrument. Types of reliability. There are 4 types of reliability stated by Gibbs. They are test-retest reliability, parallel forms, inter-rater reliability, and intra-rater reliability. With test-retest reliability, the same test is administered to the same people on different occasions to ensure stability. And parallel forms refer to the same test being reproduced in several different versions with the same level of difficulty. And inter-rater reliability is ascertained when different raters agree on the score on the same test. Intra-rater reliability, on the other hand, is obtained when the same rater gives a consistent score on different but equivalent tests. A reliable entrance exam would ensure that there is no discrepancy in the measure of competence level of students from year to year. In other words, incoming students would possess the same level of competence as the students accepted in the previous years. And in addition to the consistency of skill level from year to year, another criterion that can be applied to the EDT/ODT is inter-rater reliability. In the Korean program, I believe this is the same with other programs as well. EDT/ODTs are evaluated by at least 2 professors. And I always feel lucky to have a professor in the Korean program who has similar view and similar opinion of what kind of requirements we want from our students. So whenever we give up the EDT/ODT to other professors, surprisingly, they give me similar results to my evaluation results. So the inter-rater reliability may be measured by comparing the scores of 2 different raters on the same test of a group of applicants. So at least in terms of inter-rater reliability in the Korean program, we never had big differences. And the other very important concept that I would like to discuss is the aptitude. Aptitude is discussed by many different scholars, and also in the TNI training context, it is also some scholars used it interchangeably with the competence. The dictionary definition of an aptitude is 1, an inherent ability as for learning, that is talent. 2, quickness in learning and understanding, that is intelligence. 3, the condition aptitude test is an examination that attempts to determine and measure a person's ability to acquire some specific set of skills through future training. In the context of TNI, quite a few scholars talked about TNI-related aptitudes that are deemed important. As early as in 1930, Miryoung Sohn defined cognitive skills that are intelligence, intuition, memory as important aptitude, as well as moral and affective qualities such as tact, discretion, and poise as important qualities. And Kaiser in 1978 conducted his research, and in his research he cited knowledge of language and of the world and personal qualities such as analytical and memory as important aptitude for TNI. In their comprehensive study conducted by Gerber and his colleagues in 1989, knowledge of language and cultures and ability to quickly grasp and convey meaning are cited as important aptitudes, and as also speaking skills and wide general knowledge and intellectual curiosity are considered important aptitudes. Now I'd like to move on to the phase 1 of the study. There are 3 research questions the phase 1 of the study is based on. They are: first, is there any relationship between students' EDT/ODT scores and the degree of their success in the 2-year course in terms of GPAs? Second, is there any relationship between students' EDT/ODT scores and the degree of their success in terms of professional exam? Third, is there any relationship between the degree of student success in GPAs and professional exams? Then, EDT/ODT is the entrance exam that we give out to students, to applicants, and it stands for Early Diagnostic Test and Oral Diagnostic Test. As the name suggests, it is a diagnostic test, but in reality, it serves as an entrance exam to the TNI program. And one of the most important factors determining the success of the test would be clearly defined competences the program requires of the applicants. The competences that I would cite here are pretty much overlapping with the aptitudes that I have discussed earlier. Franz Koecker defines interpretive competence as the congruence between task demands and qualifications, and points out that an understanding of qualifications is crucial to professionalization in general and interpreter training in particular. And for entry requirements to interpreter training institutions, he lists knowledge, cognitive skills, and personality traits as the competence that are expected of applicants. And Barbara Moser-Mercer mentions 3 main areas to be tested. And they are: first, knowledge, which includes mother tongue, foreign language, and cultural knowledge. And second, skills, which include comprehension, speed of comprehension, and production, and memory capacity. And thirdly, personality traits that include stress tolerance and resilience. These sets of competence are also in line with the competence sets listed as important by GS-style faculty members. A GS-style faculty survey was conducted as part of the phase 1 of my research to help identify the intended purpose of the EDT/ODT. The survey was conducted in 2005. In the survey, I used 5 competence sets mentioned in the Gerber's study and asked which of these 5 sets the GS-style faculty found most important. And those received high responses are profound knowledge of active and passive languages and cultures, and cognitive skills that included ability to grasp rapidly and convey the meaning of what is being said, and general knowledge and interest, and a willingness to acquire new information. And GSTile has formed an EDT committee to work on the daunting task of the EDT revision. And in an effort to design a more valid and reliable test, the EDT committee has had a lengthy discussions on competence sets that we would like to require of our students. And there are 5 categories identified: language, culture, knowledge, analytic and cognitive abilities, and technology-related skills. In each category, we have identified specific skill sets that are considered important, but I will not elaborate on that since it is still an ongoing process, and a lot of them overlap with the competences I have just listed in the previous slides. The hypothesis. The hypothesis drawn from the earlier mentioned research questions is students who received higher scores in the EDT/ODT are more likely to receive higher GPAs throughout the 2-year course and have higher pass rates in professional examination at the end of the 2-year course. The subjects of the study are 30 graduates from the Korean program of the GSTile, 17 MATI, and 13 MACI students who graduated between 2003 and 2006. And out of these 30 students, 26 students declared their A language as Korean and B language English. And 4 students declared their A language as English and B language Korean. The data sets that I used for this research is EDT/ODT data of these 30 subjects and GPAs in core courses in translation, consecutive interpreting, and simultaneous interpreting. And also professional exam scores of these 30 subjects were used for data analysis. The biggest difficulties for me in doing this research was converting different data sets for comparison. Professors here would understand this. EDT/ODT data is, the final result is in numerical form, 1 or 2 or 4. But each section of the EDT is in an ordinal scale of acceptable, marginal, and unacceptable. And as you know, GPAs are in numerical form, and professional exam is also in ordinal scale of pass, high pass, or fail. So those different sets of data, how do I compare these different sets of data? So what I did was convert the manipulating GPA, the numerical form of GPA was not a question. So I decided to convert the ordinal scale of EDT/ODT and professional exam into a numerical form by calculating acceptable percent of EDT/ODT and pass percent of professional exam. And the statistical data analysis was conducted with the help of statisticians. So this table shows you all the data of 30 subjects, acceptable percent of EDTs, and first year GPAs, second year GPA, cumulative GPA, and pass percent of professional exam. And also it shows the ranks of each student in each category. And this table shows you the relevant EDT/ODT sections and professional exam sections. So in the professional exam, translation into A language, it is considered relevant to essay writing into A, translation into A, and abstract writing. And for translation into B in professional sections, were considered relevant to essay writing into B, and translation into B, and abstract writing in the EDT section. And consecutive interpretation into A is considered relevant to extemporaneous speech in A language. And consecutive interpretation into B is considered relevant to pronunciation skill in B language, and abstract thinking in B language, and extemporaneous speech in B language. And simultaneous interpreting into A language is considered relevant to extemporaneous speech in A language. And simultaneous interpretation in B language is considered relevant to pronunciation in B, abstract thinking in B, and extemporaneous speech in B. This figure shows you the correlations between EDT and first-year GPA, second-year GPA, cumulative GPA, and professional exam. This is a Pearson correlations and p-value. The p-value of 0.05 or lower would indicate positive correlations. And what this is showing is that there does not seem to be direct correlations between the EDT, ODT, and the cumulative GPA, as you can see. Also, there does not seem to be a significant correlations between the EDT, ODT, and the first-year GPA, as the p-value is recorded at 0.054, which is higher than, but quite close to the 0.05, which is a threshold value. And there are, however, strong positive correlations between GPAs and the professional pass rate. What it means is that those who did well in the EDT, ODT did not necessarily perform well in school, earning high GPAs or passing more professional exam sections. But those who earned higher GPAs did pass more sections of professional exam. So we can say students' GPAs are a good indicator of predicting student success in the professional exam. And now I'd like to move on to the second phase of the study, which is still a work in progress. The underlying hypothesis for the second phase of the study is the new test is expected to be a good predictor of students' performance in school in terms of GPA, and thus has a positive predictive value. In the second phase of the study, I have developed a set of alternative tests that could be used in place of the ODT only, and administer the test to two groups of new students. The decision to develop alternative test sets for the ODT only is made based on the fact that the ODT test sections are designed to measure mostly linguistic proficiency in both A and language separately. And they do not include any tests that are designed to measure other key competencies for interpreting, commonly suggested by interpreting scholars. Especially those that are listed by Gerber's study, the ability to process rapidly and convey essential meaning, and cultural knowledge. The new test sections are developed with these key competencies in mind, and in designing new test sections, I intentionally did away with actual interpreting tests, as there is still unresolved, ongoing discussions about whether administering an exam designed to measure skill sets that have not been taught can be justified. Well, personally, I would prefer to give interpreting tests to applicants, but because I did not want to be criticized for being biased, I did not include those tests in this. Total number of 5 test sections were developed and administered over a 2-year span between 2007 and 2008. And they are oral closed tests in English, recall summary test from Korean to Korean, recall summary test from English to English, and recall summary test from Korean into English, and recall summary test from English into Korean. To elaborate on each test section, for the oral closed test, students listen to an approximately 4-minute segment on food additives and health issues. I consider this topic quite general, and the text was selected from a newspaper article on the topic of food safety issue and pre-recorded by a native English speaker at a speed of 100 words per minute. A combination of randomly selected words and context-based words were selected and removed from the text. And the speaker said blank to indicate that students are supposed to fill in the gap. And students write down the word as that could fill in the gap as they listen to the recording. And no word list was given to students, and the total number of blanks was 17. The monolingual recall summary test in Korean, students were instructed to listen to an approximately 4-minute pre-recorded Korean speech and summarize in Korean in about 200 words. The original text is about 400 words long. And the text was chosen from a Korean newspaper article on stress management and read live by a native Korean speaker at a 100 word per minute speed. And the monolingual recall summary test in English was administered in the same manner. The speech was pre-recorded by an English native speaker at a 100 word per minute speed. And the text was about 110 word long. And the text was selected from a weekly news magazine on a cultural topic of wedding ceremonies in the US. For the bilingual recall summary test from Korean into English, students were instructed to listen to an approximately 4-minute pre-recorded Korean speech and summarize in English in about 200 words. The text was from a 420-word Korean newspaper article on the North Korean nuclear issue and read live by a native Korean speaker at a 100 word per minute speed. The bidirectional recall summary test from English into Korean was administered in the same manner, and the speech was pre-recorded by a native English speaker at a 100 word per minute speed. And the text was selected from a news article with a total of 115 words. It is a first-person narrative about a personal experience as a Westerner living in China. The first test was administered in the first week of academic year 2007 to the 16 new students. And the second test was administered in the first week of academic year 2008 to the 14 new students. Both groups of students were given the identical test sets. The tests were administered in the first week of the school year before students were exposed to any official TNI training in school. On the day of the test, students gathered at one of the simultaneous interpreting labs of the GS style, and all 5 above-mentioned test sections were administered one after another on the same day. Before the start of the each exam section, instructions on the test were given to students, and each student was assigned one interpreting booth, and their test was centrally recorded by the administrator. In evaluating the test, ordinal scale of acceptable, marginal, and unacceptable used in the EDT-ODT is used. Since the tests are developed as an alternative to the ODT, the statistician that I worked with advised that the new test be evaluated on the same scoring scale as the EDT-ODT for data consistency. And the tests are scored according to the following scoring rubric. For the audio close test, I gave a full point for a correct substitute word that fits the context, but it should be in correct usage grammatically. And deduct half point for the correct word, but with wrong usage, that is, wrong tense. And give half point for a correct substitute word that fits the context, but used with wrong usage. So the acceptable range was 80% or above correct, and marginal range was 70 to 79% correct, and unacceptable range was below 70% correct. For the recall summary test, I have used the same scoring rubric as the one used for the EDT. The acceptable would be accurate and thorough summary of facts, coherent description of relationships between ideas, and marginal would be inaccurate or insufficient summary of facts and or lack of clarity in description of relationships between ideas. And unacceptable would be incorrect portrayal of facts and or incoherent description of relationships between ideas. This is the exact rubric that we use for the EDT evaluation. The subjects of the study. The subjects for the second phase of the study are MAT, MATLM, MATI, and MACI students in the Korean program who started their study at the GS style from academic year 2007 to 2008, graduating class of 2009 and 2010. The reason MAT and MATLM students are added in the second phase is to secure the same number of subjects as in the phase 1. So all 30 students declare their A language as Korean and their B language as English. Out of 30 students, 16 students are from the class of 2009 and 14 students are from the class of 2010. And the data sets that are used are new test scores and EDTs, GPAs, and professional exam scores. As I have mentioned, the second phase of the study is a work in progress, and the statistical data analysis is incomplete as yet. Thus, in today's presentation, correlational data between new test and professional exam scores is not going to be included. Here again, as with the first phase of the study, I had to convert the new test data to match with the GPA's numerical data. So the acceptable rate of new tests were calculated and compared against GPAs and professional exam scores. And the statistical analysis was conducted with the extensive help of a statistician. Two scatter plots are shown here. One on the left, this side, shows relations between new test acceptable rate and first year GPA. And the one on the right shows relations between EDT acceptable rate and first year GPA. The left plot shows that students who scored higher acceptable rate in the new test earned higher GPA in the first year, whereas the right plot shows no such positive correlations. The correlations between the first year GPA and the acceptable rate of new tests. This Pearson's correlation analysis shows the correlations between the first year GPA and the new tests and first year GPA and the EDT ODT. There are no correlations established between EDT and new test. And the EDT and the first year GPA with p-value of 0.094 and 0.425 respectively, there are no correlations. On the other hand, there are strong positive correlations between new test and first year GPA with p-value of 0.00. And that is to say that those who scored higher in the new test performed much better in school, earning higher GPAs in the first year. This is a one-way ANOVA analysis that is conducted to see the difference in mean value of new tests among different degree tracks. It shows that MACI students scored higher in the new test than their peers in other degree tracks. This indicates that the new test, which is mainly to substitute ODT, is a good tool to identify students who would better fit for the integrating degree track. This plot shows that students who received higher acceptable rates in the new test also earned higher cumulative GPAs over 2-year time. So the findings of the study in phase 1 provides insights into the relationship between 3 major assessment data and the GS style. The statistical analysis shows that there does not appear to be direct correlations between the EDT-ODT scores and the professional exam scores. Likewise, there are no significant correlations established between EDT-ODT and first-year GPA. I use the word significant because the p-value of 0.054 could be deemed somewhat positive depending on how you would like to view the data. However, there are no correlations established between EDT-ODT and cumulative GPA. The analysis also suggests that there are strong positive correlations between GPAs and professional exam scores. The statistical analysis of the second phase of the study shows that the new test scores have strong positive correlations with students' first-year GPA and cumulative GPA respectively. However, it again showed that there are no correlations established between the EDT-ODT and students' GPAs. The first-year GPA turns out to be a very significant variable in finding correlations with other variables. It is due to the fact that the first-year GPAs, especially the second semester GPA, is a decisive factor in determining a student's degree track in the second year. In other words, strong positive correlations with first-year GPA and cumulative GPA also implies that the new test is an effective tool to predict student success in school as well as students' degree track. The EDT-ODT does not prove to be effective in predicting students' performance, which calls for plenty of room for improvement. And new tests presented today may be considered as a viable option to explore. And secondly, in attempting to improve the current EDT and ODT, in-depth discussions on desired competencies need to take place among faculty members. In this sense, the ongoing progress that the GS-5 EDT committee is making is a welcome movement. In terms of the test administration, current practice of self-administered off-site testing needs to be reformed. And as a matter of fact, the current scope of EDT revision assumed by the EDT committee also includes this. So the issue is likely to be resolved as the GS-style is planning to convert all the EDT tests to online tests in the near future. So this concludes my presentation, and I would like to open the floor for questions or comments if you have any. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I thought I would have some microphones brought somewhere.
I have a question. I just got a couple. First off, thank you for sharing your research. It's just wonderful to be able to see the work that you've done and think about how that applies to the challenges that we face as a school and across all of the language programs. One thing that comes to mind is what you referred to at the very end, the issue of taking the tests online. The traditional approach, and when I say traditional, I'm referring to the European tradition of testing candidates for an interpreting program, is to require them to travel and take an exam at a given time and for there to be interviews. And that is an approach that colleagues in Europe feel very strongly about. And I can understand why, because it would help address a number of the criteria that you set out at the beginning without having to necessarily create a test specifically for those things, because through interaction one can somewhat infer, and I think we've based a lot of what we do in interpreting and in training on inference for a long time. But how do we make sure that these things are tested appropriately with the new demands that are coming from students? They're saying, I'm interested in coming, but I'm not going to get on a plane to take a test. How do we design those, and what kind of test security do we need to be thinking about?
Well, actually, the European tradition of the entrance exam that we just mentioned is also a Korean tradition in Korea.
Okay.
All the TNI programs in Korea administer their entrance exam on the same day when the students, applicants gather on-site to their school. But I understand it's not a viable option in the US, and I personally prefer to have face-to-face entrance exam. But because that is not an option here, how do we address that by going online? The way that the EDT committee is currently working on is that we set up, I will take the example of my test. For instance, we would pre-record all these test sections and then upload it, and when the students apply to our school, we can give out their login number, and that students will be able to log into that site specifically with that number. And then the test, we can also, I understand that we have the technology to configure the test to be timed. So it's not like they can take the test forever or have somebody else come in to do the test. So in that way, I think we can somehow address that issue.
Okay.
And with the current technology, I think it's not that far-fetched idea to have the full test security.
Do you think it would make sense to include a virtual face-to-face interview given the technology that is available now?
Yeah, I do believe so, yes. With Skyping, and also with that login number, we can set up a time and have both professor and the applicants meet on virtual site to talk about or test the applicants in real time.
Mm-hmm. Last follow-up question, something I've been thinking a lot about. How do you quantify the assessment that comes from a face-to-face interview?
That's a tough question. Before going on to the interview, I don't think any professor would go without any preparation. I think it is very important that in each program they set up certain number of questions that they would have to ask the applicants. For instance, the way the entrance exam is conducted in Korea is they give out short consent to applicants. So each program you can decide whether to give the short consent or like recall test or something like that, and develop your own rubric that just like the one that I have just showed you. And that way you will be able to quantify the qualitative characteristics of the result of the interview.
Thank you.
I had a question about the new task that you were using. I noticed the English texts were shorter, which I imagine could be a feature of how you count words. But then I also wondered, it was both of them seem to have a higher need higher cultural information than the Korean text you might have chosen. And I was wondering if you noticed a difference as in your initial analyses as students were responding to them. That was the case.
Well, actually, the length of the texts are similar, with 400 words approximately.
Oh, okay. Then I might have missed that part.
But it is true that the English text has more cultural implications, because at the time I developed this test, we in the Korean program had more students whose native language is Korean. So I thought it was very important that they be well versed in their B language culture. So that's why I selected the text with more cultural components.
Okay, so those were scored a little higher on the cultural value than this.
First of all, thank you very much for sharing your research. been dying to hear how it was going. I'm sure there's a lot of number crunching been going on. I'm curious to hear a bit more about the two profiles you described at the beginning of your talk. The one who seemed to be a shoo-in, and the other one who looked as though it might not work in one direction. And you seem to be saying that the current test that we have didn't really catch either of them. It was ambiguous on either of them. And I wondered if you wanted to say a bit more so I could understand who they were in the profiles. And a follow-up to that is, I've been thinking about our changing profiles over the last 25 years anyway, and we've talked about it. And there are, luckily, perhaps, more people interested in becoming translators and interpreters who are heritage speakers and bilinguals, and whether there's anything that we have to do in a diagnostic test to, I don't know how to put it, bilinguals aren't necessarily going to be good interpreters because of the constraints of that job. If there's any kind of test item we have to put in to catch that. And the last thing I wanted to say was I've done quite a few interviews with candidates, and I thought you might be interested in an anecdote. One candidate looked really good on paper, but he hadn't spent hardly any time in country. But it still wasn't that bothered me. It was when we had a talk, it turned out that he actually wasn't interested in spending any time in that country because he thought it wasn't really relevant if he was just going to be a translator working with a written word. And to me, that was straight elimination criteria. But I would never have found out if I hadn't spoken to him. He was indignant when I suggested he go to country and then reapply.
Okay. First, about the profiles of those two examples, the student A case was the problematic case. And the problem with her was that she has perfect linguistic skills, but she didn't have the skill to connect between these two languages. She didn't have the interlingual skills. So she's capable of expressing her ideas in her A language, and she's capable of expressing her ideas in B language. But when she hears A language and is asked to reproduce that into B language, she was not capable to, and vice versa didn't work either. So in the EDT, which is a written portion of the test, it has translation. So we can see whether that person can have, whether an applicant has the interlingual skill or not. But in our ODT, it's mainly pronunciation skills, extemporaneous skills, abstract thinking. So it's just expressing his or her ideas randomly. So there was no linkage between A and B languages. So that was the problem with the student A, and there was no way we could find that out in the EDT ODTs that we had previously. So that's why I developed ODT, alternative ODT sets to the current ODT. And the heritage speaker issue, I think it's the same issue too. Just because someone is bilingual does not mean that that person is born to become a good interpreter or translator. They have to have this cognitive skill, which is the interlingual skills, that grasping the idea quickly and being able to express it in another language. But not all the bilingual people have that ability. So I think designing a test for the heritage speaker would be somewhat in line with this profile too. And about the issue of having a person live abroad where their B language is spoken, I think it's very important that the person have that experience before joining the TNF program, but I don't necessarily think that's a must, because depending on what kind of experience you have in foreign countries, it can be a waste of time. Just because of the time that's spent does not justify that they can be capable of understanding the culture or everything else that is going on in that country. So I think I would like to see more of the quality of the time that they focus on studying the language language or the culture rather than just the time spent overseas. I hope that answers your question.
That's a really good thought, yeah.
Thank you for all the information you're sharing with us. I wanted to ask you, have you considered having two different exams for, say, translation or perhaps even TLM as opposed to interpreting? I mean, I see that based on the knowledge requirements you have something is a stress tolerance, for example, which seems to me that except for test taking, I think it's quite different, the requirement for a CI as opposed to a translation student. So why would they go through that? And I see how a student may not be interested in traveling, or, I mean, I know who wouldn't, but say someone may not be as interested because they're thinking, well, I'm very fluent in my language, I can fully read and understand in context, therefore I can do my job very well, but I'm not a traveler, for example.
Well, honestly, the test, when I started out this research, my focus was on context interpreting only. So that is why the first set of subjects included only CI and TI students. And in the second phase, TLM and T students were included just to make up for the third number of 30 subjects. So in the future, I would like to explore the possibility of having a separate test set for T and TLM, but currently my scope includes only the interpreting test.
Thank you very much for sharing your research. I'd like to echo, the colleagues said about congratulating you for, coming this far. I would like to know, to go back to what you said about this, the student aid you mentioned in the beginning, and this the lack of ability to, translate between the two languages, which she spoke very, very well. And usually when you think of people who speak two languages very well, they have this natural ability to translate. And I wonder what made that student, incapable of translating between the two languages she spoke so well. And what could be, what kind of ability, that person is lacking. And this is something is related to, what you presented at the beginning, for example, Gerber's study and also other people's study. And for example, the new tests you presented, how do we translate, those, what we want to do in those tests to the abilities that those researchers, presented in the research, for example, cognitive skills, and other types of skills when working in these candidates.
I don't necessarily believe that all bilinguals are naturally born translators. Well, it depends on the context, I believe. If it's a really community setting, community interpreting setting, and the content is not that difficult, I think people can interpret or translate quite easily if they have the language. But we interpret or translate much more complicated and sophisticated text. And when it comes to that, even being a bilingual is not enough. So I think what the student A is lacking is the interlingual skill, and also she wasn't as smart as she thought we thought she would be. And she didn't have the quick comprehension speed as well. So one of the most important competencies that are cited by Gerber's study is the ability to grasp ideas quickly. And she was not that quick to pick up whatever she's listening to understand. So that was the main competence that she was lacking. On the other hand, student B, she was very quick to understand things, and she absorbs everything very quickly. So that is why, because even though her E language was much weaker than student A, she was able to improve a lot better and a lot faster than student A. And in the test I developed, I wanted to address the quicker comprehension and being able to reproduce it in other target language. So in the recall test from English into Korean And because it is time constraints, a person has, a student who's taking the test has to be quick to understand that content and be able to reproduce it, to summarize without losing most of the main ideas and major facts or elements listed in the original text.
Go ahead.
I have just a comment and two questions, and they're not related, but hope they help a lot of people that they have the same thoughts. When I was thinking so much of research, which is to rethink certain things, and I think that some people here may be thinking, I had that intuition that there was no correlation between the EDT and the GPA, and this is what we're reviewing the EDTs. I just want to highlight the importance of empirical research. This is based on data that she analyzed, not based on myths, intuition, and cliches. And that happens a lot in our profession. Sometimes we make certain statements that are just not based on empirically done research, and I appreciate that. So I know that you did a lot of work, and you see all the work that you have to do, and you wonder, right? Is that worth it? Of course it is, because from there we can start new research, right? So that's the first thing that I wanted to emphasize, the importance of empirical research. And then, well, two questions. First of all, you mentioned it, scoring rubric that we use in our work, or grading the EDT, unacceptable, marginal, and then descriptors. But I've never used that. I wonder if that's something that the Korean grammar has created.
No, it is on the faculty handbook.
Okay. That's good to know. That's great. And Cass was looking at me thinking the same thing. Where is that? I guess for the new people who've never been informed about where that was. So that's very. I'm glad that there is. Yeah. So when I complained about not having a description, that was not based on having observed all the right documents. It was that. Thank you very much. And the other thing is, we were talking in our committee about personality traits. We were thinking, that's very important. We need to be able to assess that. And I'm glad to see that some of the studies there mentioned those personality traits. But we as well mentioned that, how do you measure that? We were talking about statements of purpose. Jim was talking about different possibilities, but still how can we measure that? And I was wondering if the people that did that research mentioned any way to measure personality traits, and how do they, and the definition of those.
Well, I don't recall any, personality traits is somewhat psychological, right? And I don't recall any separate set of psychological tests conducted by different researchers. But I would think that timed interpreting or recall test would itself represent a test that could test people's tolerance to stress. Because the test itself is very stressful. And being able to produce viable or comprehensible output in a timely manner shows that that person is able to cope with that kind of stressful situation.
Right, but that's very interesting. I think that, depending on
Right.
different, yes.
Just thinking about, talking about people's personalities, I think it's, I don't know, Barry, tell me what you think, but I think it's very dangerous ground because interpreters and translators are always stereotyped. But having seen so many generations of students come and go, it's often very quiet people who end up being excellent interpreters. So I would hate to, perhaps we're asking a bit the wrong question there, not so much what's your personality, I mean there are state trait tests standardized already that can be used, but maybe the question is more like what do you like doing with your time, or how deeply do you like to, sort of activity-based rather than person-based. So a bit worried about that. Then I was thinking about what you were saying about that, the lady who was bilingual. And I'm wondering if, again, we're asking the wrong question. If I've been thinking about some students in my classes working into their Bs and why it's difficult for them. And the thing that occurs to me, I don't work into my B, and I started thinking about why would it be difficult for me to start, and it's because I don't listen to English critically. Don't tell me. going to the gateways are already set because I don't have to decode it. So I'm wondering if it's not oral comprehension, but if it's a listening skill that we can teach to a bilingual, because those bilinguals have never been taught that they have to listen critically to both languages in order to be able to, because I'm still thinking of this intro-linguistic skill is that we're talking about, and I can't think what it is unless it's starting where it really begins, which is listening. Because if you listen to Korean, you never even think about the Koreanness of it. You take out the substance and respond to the substance. And the same for me with English. I don't think about the Englishness of it. So I'm wondering if it has something to do with listening skills.
I think that's a very important point too. When you listen to a text spoken in your A language, you think you understood everything. But in reality, when you are asked to reproduce it, a lot of people have hard time reproducing it accurately. That is because not because they didn't understand, that is not because they didn't hear the word, but because they didn't listen to the content of the text. So in my classroom these days, when I teach Korean into English consecutive interpreting, I tell my students, do not write down everything you hear. They have a tendency to write down everything they hear because they hear everything. But when they come up to the podium to do the interpreting into their English, they see all the notes written, but they cannot interpret at all because they were not able to comprehend what the message was saying. So critical listening skill is really important. Analytical listening skill is really important. But on top of that, there are certain limitations in training students to listen critically or analytically unless that student has that intelligent level. So, for instance, I'm not a medical doctor, and if I go to a medical conference that I'm not familiar with, but if the conference is spoken in Korean, and I'm in that conference, I would not be able to understand anything at all, even though those conference was conducted in Korean. So just like that intelligence level or the background knowledge is also an important part in being able to produce viable things into their given languages.
I just have another observation. It's related to your presentation, but perhaps only glancingly. We talked about heritage speakers or bilinguals, true bilinguals, whatever moniker we want to put on them. And this is an issue where the stereotypes abound, both positive and negative. And it's something that we see a lot of in certain programs here at the Institute. I think the Korean program is seeing more of that as well. And those from the outside would think these are people that should do very well in the program, like student A. But what I wonder is, often we find with those heritage speakers or those bilinguals that come into the programs, is that they often wash out. And the question for me arises, is the fact that they tend to wash out a product or a factor of their bilingualness, or is it something that we pick up on quicker because they have the linguistic baseline to be able to then move on to the translation and interpreting training, whereas maybe the percentage of people who would wash out of a program, regardless of whether they have two languages or not, is going to be the same across the board, and we just see it more often in bilinguals because they're the ones that are coming. I don't know, I think that there's probably more research that needs to be done in that area to try and establish is the reason they struggle because of the way they were raised, or is it just that we find it with greater frequency because they have a higher linguistic level at the beginning of the program?
Or because they're not the self-selected language aficionado group that everybody else is.
Yeah, there's...
Or is there something in our program?
That is not exact.
I hate even to bring up the curriculum.
No, but I mean, it's true.
It's a lot of, there are a lot of.
This opens up so many questions. Yeah. So, anyway.
Lots of studies can read.
I just wanted to show you, back to that question about personality traits and also cognitive skills. I happened to read a research paper where these group of researchers administered a battery of cognitive tests and also personality tests on a group of sign language interpreter students. And among all the tests, and also the cognitive tests and the personality tests, and also sign language skills, among all of these, only sign language skills correlate strongly with sign language interpreting skills. Which means, a lot of times we have this nice idea of, thinking about some cognitive test or personality test will tell us something about the attitude of a candidate. But somehow those tests themselves do not really tell us much, unless we incorporate those attitudes or those abilities into a performance test, like what we do here, in an actual, summarizing test, speaking test, recall test, or whatever. So this is interesting. I still don't know why it is so, but empirical studies, that's the result of the empirical study, and that's very clear that the language itself correlates the most strongly with the interpreting skill of that particular language. And another question I have is about the, I wonder whether, when you did your statistics, you collect all the scores, for example, of the OEDT, ODT, also the new test you propose, with professional examination scores and also the GPA scores. Did you collapse all the scores into one? And whether specifically you have statistics of each individual,
For each individual.
closed test, recall test,
Yes.
and how each individual test
For
correlates.
the new test, that was collapsed into one as the acceptable rate. So let's say there are 5 sections in the new test, oral and recall test in 2 sections in recall monolingual and 2 sections in bidirectional recall summary test. So all 5 test sections, we collected acceptable rates from each subject. So that was collapsed into one data.
I'm just curious whether, for example, between closed test and also recall summary.
I didn't do the statistical
Yeah.
of each section.
Can I ask some question? In your lecture, you mentioned about professional exam. So I'm wondering what do you refer to? Professional examination.
I didn't hear you. Professional exam.
What
What is the professional exam? Okay. Professional exam is the exam that all the graduating students are required to take at the end of their 2-year course. So the second year students, after their 4th semester, they are supposed to take the professional exam, take it 1 week after the end of the 4th semester. And it's not necessarily required, it's not necessarily tied to their graduation requirement, but it is a required test. And once they pass each section of the professional exam, they would get a certificate on their transcript, say this person has passed professional exam in consecutive interpreting into A or into B. So that's the professional exam.
Are this examination related to the interpretation certification given by some association?
No. Well, we do give out the certificate, but I don't think it's quite the level of the certification that's given by other associations. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't think it can be compared. I don't think it's different level or not up to it. I just think they're different activities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.